Okay, let's go ahead and get ourselves going again. Had a couple good questions come up at the break that we'll just go ahead and share with everyone. Some folks were asking about, the requirement of the desks and what's in the program in terms of, there's this notion of, let me kind of pop the mouse back in. Okay. The guideline says that the desk should have about, 40 to 50 feet. That's kind of like a 5 by 8, something like that. Like what Ham's actually done here with the desk is kind of okay too. All we really care about with the desk is that you have enough room that you can roll the chair back, and you're just aware that objects actually have a little clearance room that you have to leave for them too. So if you want to have something like this where you can have a party in the middle when they all back up at the same time, but that's okay. It's just really whatever your design is going to work out to be. That should be super. What else came up? A really good question. An eagle-eyed observer noticed that Hung found this really groovy whiteboard component somewhere. So where'd you find that?
Just Google whiteboard at the Revit family I can get the website.
From like Revit City or it was some website. Yeah, no worries. So, was that?
I just found it on Revit City.
Oh, good. Beautiful. So, be good. Yeah. Do two things. A, be opportunistic about finding things. You don't have to model everything from scratch. B, when you find things like that, share them with each other. So actually, Lottie, why don't we even do this? Let's set up some space on the CEE server where people can just, in fact, I promised to put my BIMtopia library out there to share with all my pieces with people. Let's do that and just basically have it that if you find cool components, let's make a deal that if anyone starts finding cool components, we share them with each other and kind of put them in a big master library. Because really, it's like crowdsourcing. I want the power of 50 to all help us help each other. So keep track of some of these individual components you're using, and we'll get this set up in a way that we can start sharing them. Because it's really, we all have very similar needs, so we might as well start building a common library of some of these things. Okay, let us go ahead and proceed to talking about annotations. That's the next step in this whole process. And to do that, I'm going to switch over to this view that we call the dimension view. Take a look at what's going there. So here's the deal. We didn't ask you to put annotations on the first assignment, but you can if you want to. Again, because I said that, don't immediately rush out and kind of do that. You don't have to for the first assignment. Okay. But here's where it's going. From here on out, we'll start annotating our drawings and putting dimensions on them. In terms of the types of annotations, you'll find almost all of them under the Annotate tab. Again, annotations are specific things you're adding to a view to help explain it in a little more detail. Okay, so the most common one we use is dimensions. We'll talk about different types of dimensions, but we can also add line work. Sometimes if you can't find a model of something, you really just want to put some lines on that help to explain what's going on. We're also going to talk about adding text to the drawings and tags to the drawing, where text is sort of what it sounds like. It's just a textual label, which is dumb. It's kind of hanging out there, just whatever you choose to type. Tags are kind of interesting. Tags are like smart text. Because what I can do is, point to this, and it'll say Coke can. I could point to this, and it'll say lectern. I can point to objects, and it'll give me information about that object. Okay, so go ahead and tags are really, really cool. And especially they're going to be useful as we start tagging doors and windows and establishing a connection between your schedules and the tagged objects. Okay, so let's start with talking about dimensions. Oops, come back over here. Okay, the question here is really how big is this? And we have a couple of different ways of placing dimensions. We always go through and we put something in called like a witness line, and we can point to sort of reference lines in the walls, and we can go through and pick those. Let me kind of show you what I have in mind there as we go through and pick things for doing dimensions. So back over here, let's start with, I'll do kind of horizontally first. I want to go through and put some dimensions. I want to put them all the way across this building to sort of illustrate things. Okay. There's a couple of questions we might answer. What I'm going to do is actually, just so I can see things more clearly, I'm going to temporarily turn on something called thin line view, just so the thickness of the lines isn't obscuring the detail. And to do that, I can, under the View tab, choose Thin Lines. It's also kind of up here. And what Thin Lines does for me is just when I go zooming on in, It just makes it a little bit easier to spot the layers of the wall, things like that. So let me come back over here. So I got Hans walls. Here's what I'd like to do. I would love to have a dimension that shows me just the entire length of the building. Because at a high level, the biggest thing I want to know is just how big is it, at that high level. So I'd love to know how wide is it, how tall is it, just sort of figure out if it's going to even fit on the site. So how I can do that is I go to the Annotate tab. I choose of these many different types of dimensions. I have aligned, I have linear, angular, radial, I have all sorts of different types. 9 times out of 10, you're going to use aligned. Okay. What aligning does, just so you know, is it'll go through and follow a wall surface. So if you have kind of a horizontal and vertical walls, or walls that line up very nicely in X and Y, it'll go through and present those just fine. See if I can kind of, when you want the help to show up, it isn't going to. Trying to get something to pop up, and it's not helping. Okay. Aligned dimensions go through and they'll follow the wall. So if the wall is moving diagonally, the dimension will follow the wall. Linear lines, they'll do the other thing. If you have a wall that's diagonal like this, it'll measure it in X and Y. It'll measure it horizontally, it'll measure it vertically. Okay, it just depends on how you actually want to show the dimensions. So see if I can get it to pop up again. That's angular. Come on, linear. Give me the balloon. It's not going to do it. Just because it doesn't want to cooperate with me. It's just not going to do it. It's going to pop up in just a second when I don't want it to anymore. Okay, I'll go back to aligned. So here's the align dimensioning tool. Here's what happens. In terms of working with dimensions, what do I have here? When I'm placing dimensions, you notice the cursor changes a little bit. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to select references. That's different points on the geometry we want the line to hang on. Okay. So we're going to click different things we want a dimension to, and then when we're done selecting things we want a dimension to, we're going to click just in the drawing area somewhere, really indicating where we want the dimension to be placed. So here's what I mean. I'm going to come over to this wall. I'm going to come over to that wall. Okay, I got 2 things. I'm going to still hanging around. I'm just going to drop the dimension out here. That's the 3rd click. Okay, and the dimension's there. So we can add dimensions that way. Now, as you're adding dimensions, okay, you can be precise. By default, you click to the wall center lines. And that's kind of okay, but that's not really the way I like to dimension. What I'll tend to dimension is I'll go to aligned, and you actually have this choice right here of really, what would, if I'm going to hover over a wall, what would you like me to pick? Okay, do you want to get the center lines? Do you want to get the face? Do you want to get the face of the core? So you can sort of give it a preference. We can always change that, okay, but it's nice to get it set up in the right way. And I usually choose faces of core because I like to dimension the face of the studs. So if I come in now and I start putting some dimensions in, you'll see that when I go hovering over a wall, that's the face. Actually, it's still chosen the wall faces, faces the core. When I hover over the wall, if I kind of get just to the left, it'll highlight the left face. That's going to highlight the inner face. I tend to highlight those. So just the face of the core. And I'll come back over and grab this one over here again. Inner face, outer face. I'm going to get the outer face. I'll put that dimension in. You see, it doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make some difference. So it's really 31 foot 4 3/4, 31 to this wall center lines. But yeah, we'll learn to be precise about that. Again, for this assignment, don't worry about if you're not precise in terms of where those are. If you have everything just sort of kind of hang into the wall center lines, no problem. But ultimately, we start wanting to dimension to the face, and the reason we like to dimension to the face is if you think about how this thing is going to be built. You're probably going to go out and put the concrete slab down first, and then someone's going to come out and lay out some lines on the slab of where the walls will be. And when they're measuring, they're going to figure out where the edges of the wood walls will be. They're not going to figure out where the outer surface is. They want to actually measure to the face of where they're going to be building. And that's why we go to the faces of the core. So a really good dimension to put in is a big, I'll call that an overall dimension. And maybe I'll do one in the other direction too. I'll go from the outer face here to the outer face here. Okay, so at some level, I know this is a 31.5 by 17.5 foot building. And if you gave me no other dimensions, okay, that would at least get me going. I'd understand at a high level where this thing's going to fit on the truck, what's going to happen here. At a second level, here's what I'd love to see. Yeah, to help the person who's actually going to lay out and put this wall in place and put that wall in place, what's really good is to actually have a second dimension which shows really the distance to the walls that intersect the exterior. Okay? So for example, here, I'd love to have a dimension that goes here to here, and a dimension that goes here to here. And the reason I like them both is I can then measure from this side or that side, I get sort of both pieces of information. So I can go through and create the dimension to do that by coming over here. And for this middle wall, you can decide which side you want to go to, the left side or the right side, doesn't really matter. Just sort of be consistent. I can put a dimension in here. I could come over here and put a second dimension here to here and drag it in. Now that was kind of okay. I managed to get two different dimensions in there, but you might actually start to think about this as not being two separate dimensions, but as actually a single long dimension. And that's actually a better way to put them in. The reason it's actually better to put them in as a string of dimensions is that if you go through and move one, you'd like that other one to move two. You'd like them all to work together. So let's show you a slightly more powerful way to do that. If you want to put a string of dimensions in, what you do is choose the Align tool, and I'll hover to that side there, and then I'll just hover to this side there. I can keep on going out and picking more and more and just adding them all in the string. Super. And now we're ready. So we can kind of add a whole string of dimensions. Now the cool thing about dimensions is dimensions are actually two-way. They record information, but they can actually control your model too. So for example, if you didn't want 20 foot, 2 foot, 10 and 1/16, because that's kind of an odd measure. If you want to make that, let's just make it 23 feet, whatever it is. What you can do is just click on the wall. Okay. Again, I'm selecting the wall because the wall is the thing that I want to move. And then just change the dimension. I'll make that, 22 foot 10. It'll move it over. Now, that confuses people at first because you want to click on the dimension and think that you can sort of change it there. But if you click on the dimension, or if you double click on the dimension, you get something that looks like, would you like to override that value with some other piece of text, which is not really the true dimension, or put some either prefix or suffix on it to help explain the dimension a little bit further. So if that's not what you're after, if what you're really after is just moving something, just go ahead and select the thing, choose the wall, okay, it'll activate the dimension. Notice there's actually two different dimensions shown right now. Your dimension that you place, there's also the temporary dimension measured to the center lines of the walls. Just really use whichever one you want. If it's blue, you can edit it. It's basically the rule. So we'll put a dimension that way. I'm going to put a dimension going in the other direction too. I'm going to go from this to that wall. And you might have to zoom in to kind of get it accurately. And I'll come back over here. Great. So got dimensions going in two directions. This is a pretty darn good looking set of dimensions. I actually like to pull dimensions, sort of be consistent about it. You're going to find out that as you're putting your drawings together, you could have dimensions all over the place. Okay. And the big walls, those are probably enough to kind of get the dimensions. You probably don't need to give me the dimension between here and here. Or there are a lot of dimensions you don't necessarily need to show at this point. If you really want to call out there's some specific clearance that we really want to make sure there really was a 3 foot clearance there or something like that, you can go ahead and add that in there. But for the most part, this is a pretty good set to at least understand the building at a high level. Now, if I really wanted to help the person who's going to frame the building go one step further, I could go even one step further and say, not only am I going to show you where the walls, I'm going to tell you where the windows are relative to the walls. And let's show you how that would work. Let me run a string of dimensions just between the windows. So those dimensions are all 4 foot 5 1/8 there. That's actually looking pretty good. I could extend those to actually bring them back to the wall too. But what I want to show you about string dimensions that's actually kind of cool is they have a very neat property which allows you to, go through and kind of change the behavior. Okay. If ever you have a series of string dimensions, okay, of things that are sort of spaced out along that string, you have this option here, something called the EQ, which right now it's not EQ, so they're not equal. You can go ahead and use dimensions to make things equally spaced. So if we wanted to have those windows spaced out evenly, so it's a perfect dimension between the first and the last one, I can just turn that EQ off, okay, and it'll go through and put them just equally spaced. Okay. So that could be a really useful thing to do sometimes. If you do an equal spacing on windows or doors along the wall and you later move one of the walls, the windows will space themselves out again evenly so that like it's always honoring that equality that you want to put in place. So that's just another way to do it. But in terms of the dimensions here, if I was really going through, let me even turn off the equality. Oh, what could I do with this? I'll leave them that way. I would like to go ahead and have that dimension actually extend to the wall so I can see really where the first one is. If you have an existing dimension and you want to edit it, you want to add another reference line and kind of extend it, what you need to do is just hover over the dimension now and right-click, and you'll find Edit the Witness Lines, which then gives you the option of adding another piece to it. Oops. Try it again. Edit the Witness Lines, and adding another piece. I still have to click to lock it in and place it. So that's 6 foot 10 from the outer wall here. But this level of dimensioning, outer, maybe the interior walls, if you really want to be great, you got to measure to the window openings, super. That's enough dimensions for what you need. Yeah. No one really needs to see the dimension from here to here. I can scale that. Even better, visualize, get a pretty good sense of really, it's probably about 4 feet from this desk to that countertop. I can measure that if I need to. Actually, I should point out to you, there's also a little measuring tool that I don't hardly ever use. It's around too. I can go through and just measure between here and there and just sort of dynamically just check things to make sure. You don't have to put dimensions in all the time. Sometimes you can just sort of pull out your tape measure and kind of just verify the dimensions between different things, just to kind of make sure you have the right clearances. Okay, so dimensions kind of work like that. Let's stop and talk about dimensions for a minute. How are dimensions feeling? Get a sense of how that works? It's really usually not too bad. The biggest change, thing people typically have to sort of wrestle with, is that whole notion of, if I want to change the dimensions, do I go through and choose the object, or do I go through and choose the dimension? And again, if you want to change the placement of the object, choose the object. If you want to change something about the dimension line, for example, change the dimension line to, I'll go ahead and extend it. I'll edit the witness lines, take it over and add that in there again. The dimensions seem to work out pretty good. But I tend to put dimensions in floor plan views. I tend not to put too many dimensions in elevation views. Because in the elevation views, a lot of the information that I need that's critical, that the first floor is at 0 and the roof's at 9, a lot of the information is already there. Okay, so you don't need to dimension everything on every drawing. In fact, it's almost better not to dimension everything on every drawing. Especially used to be that way when things weren't automatically dynamically connected in that. You'd put a dimension on one drawing, you'd change it on one drawing, and it wouldn't change on the other drawing, and there'd be an inconsistency. We don't have that problem with BIM modeling anymore. But it's good to sort of put your dimensions in a very consistent place so people know where to look for them. So it's nice to have a nice floor plan view that's nicely dimensioned. Okay, so dimensions is definitely the start of where we're going with all this. Okay, you can add edit the dimension lines by changing the witness lines. That's these little guys over here. And within all that, there's this whole notion of, the equality constraint. The next type of annotation I want to tell you about is just sort of a piece of text. And that's easy. You don't really need to sort of spend much time thinking about that. On the Annotate tab, there's a piece of text tool. And use text judiciously. Now, there are times when you just run out of time, you can't find the perfect part to model it, or even here. it may not be perfectly obvious that that's a whiteboard from just looking at the floor plan. I can tell it in the 3D view. So if you need to, just go ahead and put a whiteboard in there. I'll say that, hey, that is basically a whiteboard. And add, just again, little pieces that are going to help tell the story. Now, text doesn't have too much in terms of interesting properties. There is sort of a notion of different sizes of text and the font style and stuff like that. Those are all type properties. So for example, I want my 3/32 inch Arial type family to be bolded. I can go through and turn on the bolding. Actually, just so you know, what it does is by default, it's giving you, that's the size that it would actually print out on the sheets, 3/32 inch tall. Now, I tend not to go through and do it that way. I'll go through and set up some types based on the use of the different types of text. So for example, I'll go through and I will create a type. I'll duplicate this. And I'm going to call this, my floor plan notes. Okay. And then that'll have one specific type and style. Then I'll create another type for a different use and go through and give it a different type and style. And it's actually a little more powerful for you to actually think about the use and then be able to control things based on the use. Because if it turns out my floor plans are getting really, really crowded, I can change all the floor plan notes and just shrink them up a little bit. That won't affect everything. So, start thinking about things in terms of how they're used as opposed to just literally the size. Okay, so you can do that. Another thing you can do is, I'm going to put just a label on some rooms. So I take a piece of text. It won't have a leader. Let me create a type for that. I'm going to say that there's going to be some sort of a room label. And that'll be a little bit bigger. It's going to be, instead of 3/32, I'll make it 4/32. Okay. And this is going to be my workroom. Or storage, or whatever I want it to be. Again, I can center that, move that around. Most people get the idea of text pretty easily. But text is kind of cool, but it's not quite as powerful as the next thing we want to show you. So, file text away, it's useful, but really pay attention to the notion of something that's different called a tag. Okay? And tags work this way. Tags are like they're smart text. Tags are all about basically going through and putting markers in the drawing that refer to information that can be pulled out of the building information model, pulling text out of the database that's behind it. So we have lots of choices about what we want to show. A very common type of tag we put in is doors and window tags. Because you have this window hanging out in the floor plan. It's looking okay, but you'd really like to be able to identify that window in some way that you can correlate it back to what showed up in the window schedule and kind of tie that all together. So here's the idea. Let's come back over and let's take a look at your window schedule. So what? I have some windows in here. I have type 46 windows. I have type 74 windows, type 76, and type 77. Okay. The windows are actually showing up with what's called a type mark. A type mark it's an identifier that's common to all the things that share the same type. And you can go ahead and keep them like 46, 74, 76, 77. That's the default stuff. I tend to actually name my windows A, B, C, and D. But it's just really, it's some marker that's going to be able to kind of link this piece of information in the schedule back to what's going on there. If you want to change your type mark, no worries. Just put a new mark in here. So it's going to change all of those. I'm going to say fine. That's going to be my B window. What am I doing? I'm just changing values in the database. But what I'm doing is changing all the windows that have that same type. And again, use whatever scheme seems to make sense. I like to keep my type marks very simple. I tend to number doors and put alphabetic designations on windows, but every office has its own funny way of looking at this. So I just change those different designations. So I know the A window is 3x4, the B window is 3x5. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's go back over to the floor plan. I would love to identify the windows here so you could tell whether that was a 3x4 or a 3x5 window in the floor plan. And how you do that is we go through and use this thing called the tag. Tagging again shows up under annotation. It's next to text, it's the next thing on down. And tagging works like this. I can tag by category. Within that, I have this notion of really, is there going to be something called a leader? That's like a little line that connects the tag back to the object. I'm just going to leave that in for now, accept the defaults. I'm going to hover over that window. And notice when I hover over that window, it's going to say, oh, that's a window D. That's a window D. That's a window D. That's a window A. That one's a B. See if I can get it on the outside. Oh, actually, it's going to sit at the outside. That window's actually probably inside out right now. We'll figure that out in a second. If I choose the window, let me edit them. Yeah, the inside's out, so I'm going to flip it out. I'll move the tag over to the side. Okay. But tagging just gives you an interesting way of connecting things back. The cool thing about tagging again is I can look at the floor plan, tell that the A corresponds with that schedule. So I got my A's, I got my B's. Sort of gets to a question that some people have relative to the assignment. People are sort of saying, well, where should I put the schedule? Like in the sheet views. And what I'll tend to do is, if I got my floor plan view, and actually what I'm going to do is, well, I'm going to put the detailed one in there instead. Or dimension one in there. It's a little big right now. I'm going to crop that down in a few minutes. But what I can then do is take the window schedule and just put it in the same view. And the nice thing is if I do that, someone reading this thing can say, oh, D, D, A, and read the information they need. Get more of the story told just kind of in a single view. So tagging actually works out really well in floor plan views. What I tend to tag as a starting point, you can really tag any of the objects. Again, the tags are only a single view. I'll tend to tag the windows and the doors just so I can get the corresponding schedules. So I can go back to annotate. I'll tag that one, that one, that one. If you got to put a lot of tags in there, I'm going to show you another way to do it. Let me just flip that one. Leave the odd man out. Tag by category. Another thing you can do is actually just tag everything that is of a certain category. So it's not going to be very dramatic. There's only 4 of them here. It probably wouldn't be that hard to tag them individually. But if I want to tag all the doors really, really quickly, as opposed to just tagging by category, I could go ahead and say tag all, and it'll give me some different categories. Well, what things would you like me to tag? And I'm just going to choose doors right now. So only, I'll say all objects in the current view, so all the doors in this current view. I could say all the objects on the selected objects. You can sort of get a choice. You'll notice there's a lot of things we can tag in here, rooms, walls, and stuff like that. I'm not going to tag them all, but all the information is available. You could go through and tag any walls to show what the wall type is. You could tag every piece of furniture to kind of show a little bit of information what it is. I'll just stick with the door tags for now. I'll give them a leader. And I'll say either apply or OK. Actually not showing that there. Let's see if it's OK. Why are they not showing? Let's go back. Tag all. I'll think about that in just a second. Oh, instead of the selected object, I'm going to choose all the objects. I'm sorry, that's what it needed to be. Okay, so that'll put the doors in. You'll see that's door 3, that's door 4. Button over there is door 1 and 2. There's door 1 and 2 over there. Tagging is sort of a really good way of getting things put together. A nice thing is, if you have the like doors and windows tagged in the floor plan view, you can also tag them in the elevation views. That's actually kind of a nice thing too, so people can make the correspondence between the elevation. So over here, I got that view of the front of the building. If I would like to tag that, I can say annotate it. Let's go ahead and I'm going to tag all the windows. I want to get the doors too. I can get that. I'll Control-click to get that. Let me say all the objects, all the doors and window in this view. I won't put a leader. It'll sort of show up in the center. So real quickly, I have this, again, correspondence between all the different windows and the callouts for what they are. So tagging is a really incredibly useful thing. And we're going to learn to go through and actually change the tags so that as opposed to showing the type mark or the individual mark, we can show the family name or the height or the width or whatever property. Any property that you can go ahead and pull out of the database can show up in those tags. Okay, anything you can put in a schedule can show up in those tags.
Is it too much to put all the dimensions and all the tags in the same plan, or should we do two different?
I tend to keep them together. So yeah, I think a good looking floor plan often has dimensions and tags kind of all hanging around in there together. You might want to take the furniture out or something like that. Like in this dimension view, if this is looking a little cluttered, I can visibility graphics. Maybe I'll take the furniture out. Maybe even I'll turn off the shading in the floors because the framer probably doesn't really care about that pattern on the floor. Architecturally, I do. But you know, maybe that looks a little bit cleaner. You sort of think about really who's looking at the drawing, what information do they need, and try and give them just the information that's going to be most appropriate. Because excess information may just clutter things up and kind of confuse them. Okay, so we've got these different types of views. We've got these floor plan views. We're annotating them. That's kind of cool. Let me go through in our last little bit together this morning, talk about just some of the other types of views, how you create them, how you control them, and get them on the sheets, including schedules. So, Lottie, don't let me get out of here without schedules. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. You got this view, and this view is looking pretty good. I'm ready to drop that on a sheet. You might notice that it's a little big when I drop it on the sheet right now. So one of the things I want to do after I sort of make sure the information's there and I get it all tagged up the way I want, is just crop it down. Cropping sort of this example of what I call tweaking the drawing to kind of really make it look the way I want it to be. So it's a little bit big for the sheet right now. If I want to shrink it, I'll choose that view. That's the cropping boundary right now. You decide really what you want to show. If you don't really care about seeing the property line, you just want to see the building, let's pull the crop in so that you're not paying attention to those things. So I can pull the crop in on all sides. Okay. And it'll be much smaller. We can get several different sheets on the views on the sheet right now. Let me go back over to the sheet. Okay, it's looking much smaller. Now I can have room for actually that schedule and the floor plan to be on the same sheet. Now, just as a matter of nuance you know about it, the first time you drag a view on the sheet, it actually figures out where the title bar should be. And it still leaves the title bar, even though I changed the cropping, it leaves it in the old place. Okay, so you could go back and adjust this manually. There's this whole thing of choosing a view and then being able to drag the, oops, I have to kind of choose the title bar, drag it around, resizing it. I can play that game and do that. There's actually an easier way, so let me tell you what that is. If you ever get your title bar out of sync with the view and you want to fix that quickly, just delete the view from the sheet and put it back on the sheet again. So here's what I mean. Here's that view. It's hanging out on the sheet. Goodbye. Don't worry. It's still in the model. It's kind of hanging out. It's just not on the sheet. I'll come back and grab that dimension floor plan. And when I pull it back in, okay, it'll resize the title bar just right at that spot. Okay, so now I got nice dimensioned tagged view. I got the schedule there. Maybe I'll put the door schedule in here too. Things are looking pretty good. Okay, so we're composing our sheets. Things are looking pretty good. Drag them in there. So cropping is one of the primary things you end up doing to your views. Let's go back to that floor plan view. You can go ahead, or the dimension floor plan. You can control other things about this. You can decide even here, do you want this to have some sort of color information to it? Do you want it to be shaded? Not much color here because it's mostly just the gray. That'll make more sense in the elevation section. Let me switch the elevations and show you that. So elevations are going to work very similarly. I added some tags in here. Okay, that's actually cropped pretty well. That's not too bad. I like it. Sections, I might want to keep them in here because then I can see what the section cuts are cut. That might be nice. It's cropped pretty well. It's colorized. That actually looks pretty good. I can turn that on or off. Other things you can do, there's actually some really groovy options in here. So under all these view options, you have things like, oh, if you want to put a little background on that, you can put a nice shaded background in there. Make it look a little bit better. If you have taken 31Q and you sort of know about drawing boundaries and silhouettes around objects to kind of indicate what's in the foreground and what's in the background, a really nice tool that's available to you if you want to make these look a little better is there's this whole notion of silhouetting. And I can go through and kind of put wide lines or really any line style just kind of in there. I can go through and what I'll show you what it does. It just, well, am I in thin line mode? I'm in thin line mode so you can't see it. Why is that locked on? There we go. Not sure if you can tell, it fattened them up a little bit. Let me actually, I'll even create a different line style so you can sort of see the effect of that a little bit better. Zillow, I can't spell this word. What? It's one of those words that you don't know how to spell, but you don't know how to spell it properly. It's one of those. Gauge is another one of those. I don't know how to spell this word. But I do know that I don't. Okay, let's make them fat. Okay, so over here, if I come over to, oops, the graphics properties, I can change them to silhouette lines. Okay, whatever it is, you can start controlling that to really kind of beef up or drop back what's in there. Oh, other things you can do to kind of glam up your views, you can go through and turn on shadows. Wasn't very dramatic here. There's just a little bit of shadow under that little bit of roof overhang. Or other things you might want to play with, there's a great view type called realistic. If you've assigned your materials, okay, we'll create something that looks like that. But you have a lot of graphic control, but really ultimately you decide how you want to tell that story. And then if you want to have several different views, each that have different visual styles, maybe architecturally I want to present it this way, okay, but to the framer I don't necessarily want to show it this way. I want to show it as a plain black and white drawing with very little kind of gussying up. I can go ahead again, make different sort of variations on that. Okay, and for this view, as opposed to all this gussying up, I'm going to make it just a hidden line view. Turn off the shadows. And then ultimately, what do I do? I'm going to turn off the background. Okay, so plain view. Oops, there it is, fancy view. Again, choose which one you want to go through and put on there. Now, we talked a little about the notion of doing the 3D views, just in answer to your question there. Again, if you want to create 3D views, the big thing is to go through and just take the 3D view, the default 3D view, rotate it to what you want to be, and then duplicate to save the camera. That's your big issue there. The other type of 3D view, I'll just going to give you real quickly, is the camera view. And I think a lot of you sort of discovered this. So let's kind of show you how it works. Camera views, they're just another type of 3D view that have perspective to them. If I go to View and I choose Camera, I can place the camera either outside the building something like that. And again, everything I've talked about in terms of what kind of view, the style of view, that'll all apply. That's just that one right there. That's kind of the exterior southwest. Okay. Or if you want to try and actually do this on the interior, again, that'll work too. So camera right from the door here, this dramatic view looking across the desks. And again, I can sort of make that realistic or whatever I want. Now, for the camera views, you have the option of, with a little orbiter tool, you can look around a little bit differently. Kind of choose whatever you want. You can try zooming it out a little. I'll warn you with camera views, zooming's kind of a funny thing. And this, you may have experienced this when you are in a building and you try and take a picture. It's hard to get a good interior shot of a building because unless you have a nice fisheye lens, you don't actually see very much. So, you can extend those a little bit to show more of the building. Don't extend it way around or you get this really distorted fisheye thing that wraps around. That'll kind of get you in trouble. But go ahead and again, create as many different views, put them in there. So your goal is ultimately, and the big lesson for today is really, it's all about create the views you need, get them set up and annotated and looking the way you want. Tell your story. Kind of think about how you're telling that story. Okay, because beyond that, after that, how you model it gets to be pretty easy. Now, I wanted to finish up just by talking about the section or the schedules and kind of show you two specific variations on that theme. One is we have this window schedule, and the window schedule is kind of looking okay. But one thing I didn't cover with you guys in class is really if you wanted to change that window schedule around a little bit and add some more information. So this is all just information kind of hanging around in the database. And if we want to start changing that, the schedule actually has all sorts of different properties too, including which fields are shown. So one field that isn't shown by default that I'll turn on is the count. The count will actually show me just how many of those different windows. So it turns out there's 4 of those view windows. Okay, so I'll turn that on just so I can see that. What I might want to actually do is actually now add a little information that isn't reported by default. For example, you can see that the height and the width and all of those things are reported for the windows, but it's not actually reporting the window area. And if you want to report that window area, what you can do is actually calculate a value, just very much like you would do in Excel, where you add a new field and you just give it a formula that relates those things together. So I could actually create a new field called window area. I'll say that, what is it? It's going to be an area because it's a linear dimension times a linear dimension. For its formula, I can kind of take a look at what things are available, like width times height. And if I add those out, you'll actually see that we now have an area in there. So we can sort of see it's 12 square feet, 15 square feet for each of those windows, 5, 15. So looking pretty good in terms of just adding new values, just calculate, add new things, very much like working with Excel. Add new formulas to it. The nice thing is if anything changes, it'll go through and update those values for you automatically. The last thing to actually show you about schedules, though, that's kind of cool is this whole notion of really doing a subtotal on that. So for the subtotal, let's show you how that would work. All the information you really need to do the total is here. It's just not adding it up for you. And to convince it that you want to add it up, there's really only 2 special steps you have to do. One is under sorting and grouping, you have to say, go through and add a total line. Okay, so you got to turn that on. That says that, yes, I'm going to compute some totals. So yes, totals. The second thing is you have to tell it, well, which things do you want to total up? Which of those columns make sense to total? And to do that, we switch to the Formatting tab, and I'll choose the window area and say, make a total on that. So just turn it on, and then which things to total. When you say yes or okay, I'll see that's actually 142 square feet. And that actually doesn't look quite, it did do the right thing. Because what it did now is, each of those is 15 square feet. There's 4 of them. There's actually like 60 square feet altogether. Okay. Don't worry about the fact that it wasn't totaling right. So for schedules, the big thing is add any fields you want to. And the most common thing you'll probably do is just turn on the sorting. Again, add yourself a total line. And then change the formatting to choose which of the things that you want to add up. Okay. There's something else that's similar to that. Let me say okay to here. If you want to total up the room areas, and there aren't that many rooms in this, so that's actually pretty easy to do. There's a room tool. I can actually put a room. Actually, you already have rooms in there. Good. Hung's already created some rooms. Let's take a look at your room schedule. Great. So we have a different area computed to those. You already subtotaled those out. That's great. I can add a field in here, or maybe put the room name in here. I'll put that up before that. Okay, so what is that? That's actually my workroom. I'm guessing that one's storage. But all we're doing now is editing the database values. And that is probably the bath. Okay, looking pretty good. For the room finish schedule, see how you're doing there. This one confuses some people. These are actually just text values. You really think the model's so smart in so many ways, it ought to be able to figure out what the floor finish is and the ceiling finish and the wall finish is, but it doesn't. It's actually a little dumb about that. Rooms as an object, we have to add a little intelligence to. So for this one, if you're filling this one in, all we're looking for is just some sort of textual label. So for the floor of the workroom, oh, I was going to carpet that. But for the bath, oh, that was going to be concrete or tile. And for the storage room, maybe that'll be concrete. So those are just text values. Just go ahead and add the text values in there. There's nothing special about that. Okay. So just fill in some textual description. Later on in the quarter, we're going to learn how you get the model to be a little smarter and actually figure that stuff out for you. Because you selected a type, it ought to know, but it doesn't. Okay. To finish, oh, on my floor plan over here, what? This is looking pretty good. I can add a room tag of all the different things that I want to have in here. Tag the room. Whatever it is, I filled out. What's it doing? It's pulling the information out of the database that I just put in there, recording those. Just going to give you a really quick idea of what's going on. That's where we want to finish up today. It's really go ahead, start thinking about the story you're telling, the views you want to create, the most effective way to kind of thread them all together on the sheets and put that all together. And annotations are a big part of helping make that happen. So go ahead and play with that. And we're going to be doing, so again, Thursday, the special session on roads and highways. So if you can join us for that, please do, or any part of that. It's going to be going on all day. If you can't make it in person, feel free to look at any of that stuff online since it's all going to be recorded. And then when we get together next Tuesday, what we're going to do is actually start looking at how we start moving up into second, third, multi-level buildings, put stairs and railings in, and thinking about things more at a commercial scale as opposed to just at a small residential scale. Okay, so that's where we're going next. So if you have any questions, stick around. We'll try and get them answered as we get the next class in here. But thanks for coming, and we will see you all hopefully on Thursday. Okay, thanks.